Pints with Jack, Season 4, Episode 1.
The Screwtape Letters. Welcome to Season 4. Welcome, everyone. Pints with Jack is your weekly C.S. Lewis podcast, where David, Andrew, and I break down and discuss the works of C.S. Lewis. This season, we are eavesdropping on the correspondence of a senior demon Screwtape, as he explains how to tempt the patient, a human assigned to his nephew, a demon named Wormwood. Each week, we'll be considering a different letter, untwisting Screwtape's hellish logic, and forming a battle plan for our own spiritual lives. So if you guys haven't realized, we're going to be reading the Screwtape letters this season.
Yay!
Which I am quite excited for. It's be very different than our last book, because the last book was one where every chapter built on themselves. This one is going to be very different, where it's more like Mere Christianity. They're building, but there's more independence to the chapters, which creates a different dynamic.
Yeah, and we have addressed the Screwtape letters before. We did it 3 times in Season 3. I was on the Council of Trent talking about it with him. We had an after-hours session with Reverend Brian McGreevy, and I think I also put up the audio for a talk that I gave in Los Angeles on the Screwtape letters. But the real advantage, though, is that we're going to be going through them letter by letter. So we're going to become intimately familiar with this particular demon.
Well, and I think this is an excellent way to go about it, because when I've taught this book before, probably the best way, for an adult formation class or whatever, is to read a letter, discuss it, and then maybe read another one, and to read them out loud. And I think that they're really self-contained enough that I find it really profitable to approach it this way. So I'm really happy.
And if for some of you, if you're wondering, what is that other third person voice? That is what we are also privileged with this season. Not only a wonderful Lewis book, as usual, but Andrew Lazo, the man, the myth, the legend himself, who has been on this podcast before, who we all loved their dynamic between David and Andrew in some of the episodes. So it is a pleasure to have Andrew here today. He's in seminary. He's a Till We Have Faces expert, wonderful person. Rather than me doing an introduction, I'll let Andrew tell a little bit about himself, but he knows so much on C.S. Lewis. And so I just couldn't do it justice. So Andrew, first of all, welcome to a more official guest on the podcast, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you. I love what you guys do. And I think that it's a real service to the Lewis world. And I think that the results of the Patreon and everything else testify to the fact that Pints with Jack is really doing exceptional work. And so what a joy to be able to join with you. I had so much fun last year during Till We Have Faces. It's a busy schedule for me. I just started a second graduate program with Northwind Seminary. So I'm working on my MDiv at the Episcopal Seminary now, where Walter Hooper used to attend. And I'm also working on my doctorate with Northwind Seminary on Romantic Theology, doing work on the Inklings. But always have time to sit back and have a drink of scotch with you all and enjoy these letters.
And what I'm so excited about with Andrew, listeners, is obviously you just heard he's incredibly smart, which is great. But he's a beautiful blend of David and myself. David and I were talking about this. It's going to be a great dynamic. I already know this without us even doing this three-way yet, because Andrew's got an incredible intelligence on Lewis beyond most, and that's going to be a gift itself. But he's so charitable and compassionate. Whenever he talks, he connects it to the Christian journey. It's not just like, I want to intellectually know Lewis. It's, I want to know, when we talk about love, what does this mean for our lives? And I love that David and I try to do that balance with each other, because David is incredibly intellectual too. And I try to do more of the application side, and you have this perfect blend between us. And so I think it's going to be a great fit.
I would like to add, I am also loving, despite what Matt just implied.
Well, you did get married, and that testifies at least to some extent to that.
Exactly. I've at least got Eros covered.
I'm particularly excited about Screwtape Letters. I just did an interview with the Colson Center with Shane Morris's Upstream podcast. And when he asked what book I would recommend for today, I just had to, it was such a strain, because of course I want to talk about Till We Have Faces, and I want to talk about Collected Letters and Voyage of the Dawn Treader. But I think that perhaps the most relevant letter for today is Screwtape Letters, and the way that it addresses where we are, and especially with all those false quotes going around that we'll address. I think that Screwtape really gets to things. And I'm interested in seeing how David responds to Screwtape, because our patient gets married during the course of the book. So I want to see if any of this advice really works for him and Marie.
It is very true. And actually, not even the parts that refer to marriage, because he also talks about the relationship between the patient and his mother, because they're living under the same roof. And Screwtape has lots of advice on how to foster disharmony in the home.
Well, we got to use this chance now. So, David, you are married officially.
I am.
Tell us about it.
It's wonderful. I definitely recommend it to everybody. It's not so much a change in life; it's more of like just a complete paradigm shift. Everything that you thought and did before, you do some of the similar things, but under very different presuppositions. It's just like there's no getting out of this now. I am yours. You are mine. What can I do for you?
Have you ever read either of you two, The Meaning of Marriage by Timothy Keller?
I have bought it. I haven't yet read it.
Okay.
No.
I'm reading it right now. I got it for my brother and now sister-in-law as of about a month ago, roughly. And I decided to buy it myself because reviews were so good. And she doesn't come from the Catholic background, so I wanted a non-Catholic resource. And it seems incredible. I've read the first 2 chapters. I'm falling in love with the book. It makes you excited for marriage.
Timothy Keller is a wonderful writer, and his book was actually recommended by Dr. Jason Lepelyavi. That was how it got on my radar.
Well, and of course, Keller owes a great debt to Lewis, and his wife, Kathy, as a child, wrote letters to Lewis and got answers back. And so there's that connection. I was recommended by Lancia Smith from the Cultivating magazine. She recommended and bought for Kristen and me The Mystery of Marriage, and which talked, funnily enough, about how marriage is like constantly looking into a mirror. And given my Till We Have Faces background, that was an apt metaphor. But you always kind of see how monstrous you are when you're married.
It's almost like the Screwtape letters. I believe it was Jerry Root that described the Screwtape letters as a mirror being held up to you.
Oh, that's great.
One of his lectures.
You count on Jerry all the time.
Well, let's jump in as usual, guys. There will be some new things that we're going to talk about in this episode to our usual weekly episodes, the structure. But there's also, of course, the quote of the week and the drink of the week. So let's go through some of those right now. The quote of the week this week is from the movie The Usual Suspects. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
Now, Matt, you haven't seen this movie, have you?
I knew you were going to do that.
Oh, you haven't.
Andrew is about to learn in the first episode Matt's lack of movie knowledge.
Oh, no, I've listened to enough episodes. I know that you have bigger
that
holes
comes
than I
across
do.
very quickly.
Oh, that's great.
Well, this was just the inaugural episode for the season, so I was looking for a quotation, and I thought, that's not pulled from the text since we're going to be doing that each episode. What saying about the devil do I think is probably one of the most popular? And this quotation just jumped into my mind. And then I realized that Matt wouldn't know it, and I could bring that up on the show. So it's like perfect. Done.
Kaiser Sose.
I love it.
Exactly. But this actually is something that Lewis is going to talk about in the Screwtape letters. Although he presents that there is an alternative that the devil can do, that he can either make a materialist or a magician. And we'll unpack what that means a little later.
Well, and he addresses the kind of way that the devil wants us to think or not think about him right at the very beginning, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Well, the drink of the week, which I am excited to announce, as much as this has been already a routine spot. 2 things. One, it's going to get taken to the next level. We have purchased an assortment of 6 or 7 scotches, and that's just to get us beginning, that we're going to genuinely taste. We're going to give you the tasting notes, our own thoughts. But the second more important point is Andrew Lazo is more or less a Scotch connoisseur, already loves this stuff. So he is going to not only bring our Lewis game to another level, he is going to bring our Scotch game to another level.
Oh, I'm not sure about connoisseur, but I am a member of a club called the 1405s, which has groups all over the country and, in fact, in England as well. 1405 was the first time the word whiskey appeared in the English language.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. So we gather 15 or 20 of us and buy 2 or 3 or 4 bottles of really nice Scotch. And we read the Bible of Scotch, the book about single malt, and then we taste. And so we'll make ourselves a little mini cross-country 1405s ourselves.
really, David, we should make this his section. We have different colors for different parts that we talk about, and this is mine. We should make this Andrew's.
Well, and I want to make it clear when Matt said that we bought some scotch, that what that means is that Matt, in his incredible generosity, made these miraculous boxes appear at each of our homes. And so I think that in addition to cheersing everybody, we should cheers Matt for his generosity.
Let's just be honest. That was Matt making up for one, David doing about 3 times the work. And that was also a welcome of Andrew to the podcast to giving his time to all of us. So ills in comparison to what we receive as a community in return from these two.
So what are we drinking today?
Okay. I've personally never had this. It's called the Balvenie Double Wood, aged 17 years. Have you had this before, Andrew?
No. And I'm more of a peaty guy, but so this is just, my Scotch knowledge is really just beginning. And it's kind of got a dark green amber kind of color to it, if I hold it up to the light. So it looks beautiful.
Which is very fitting because on the nose, which we'll all smell it right here to see if we can, but it says it's elegant and complex oak, vanilla, honeyed sweetness, and a hint of green apple. So there could be your green.
And I think probably for one of the first times ever, I think I completely agree with the tasting notes.
Yes, I smell every aspect.
And I think I can smell all of that. So if you're one of the people out there that always hears what people say in tasting notes and is like, I don't know, I just feel my nostrils burning, maybe try this one.
Well, and I'm going to encourage us to also have water nearby, because a drop of water really opens up the Scotch. And so I'm going to do it here. Okay.
I remember you saying that.
I'm going to taste it first, and then I'm going to just drip some in.
Oh, I missed that part of it, but I've already got the water in now.
All right, are we tasting?
Here we go. Yep.
Oh, wow.
That's smooth.
Can definitely taste the cinnamon.
Yep.
I love the layered richness of creamy toffee. All right.
Toffee's definitely also strong.
Now here comes a drop of water.
So the tasting notes say sweet with dried fruits, sherbet spice, toasted almonds, and cinnamon. Cinnamon. I swear I've only had a little. Toasted almonds and cinnamon, layered with a richness of creamy toffee notes and traces of oak and deep vanilla.
To be blunt, my taste isn't refined enough to get that part of the notes. I could smell everything the nose said. The tasting, I can't separate all of those aspects.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. I'd say I can get about 50% of it. Apparently, the finish is vanilla oak, honey, and spicy sweetness. The finish is much clearer, I would say.
And a drop of water, in some ways, broadens it out and mellows all of it without taking away any of the taste. So I'm enjoying this.
Well, there you go, listeners. You can expect more of that. So we also have our usual toast. And so one of the benefits of being a gold level supporter on Patreon is that we toast one of them each episode. And so today we're going to be toasting Kelly Gross. Sorry, Kelly. Sorry.
Now, what people can't see is that in the notes, I've added long O like Pope, because I had messaged Kelly and said, I just want to make sure I pronounce your last name correctly. And so I included all of that information in our show notes for Matt to read. And he got the gross part right.
I was so focused on the gross part, I skimmed over the Kelly part.
Listen, I was wondering how long it was going to take to get a reference to the Pope in there.
Hey, Andrew, we've got you beat 2-1, so it's going to happen very quickly each time.
Well, I'll cheers to that too.
So here's what we've written. Kelly, we raise a glass that every day, through God's abundant grace, you find the strength to fend off any and all attacks by Screwtape and Wormwood. Cheers.
Cheers.
Oh. All right.
Very nice.
Well, normally this is where we do our chapter summary. If you guys remember, David did that beautifully in Till We Have Faces, and he has agreed to continue it. Probably be, am I correct, David? It's going to be a little shorter?
Yes, it'll probably just be 100 words because the chapters of Screwtape are shorter, and so I need to press myself. Give myself fewer words to work with. I wanted to work with haikus again, but Matt banned me.
Unless, is it John and Greta?
Mm-hmm.
Unless they hear this and they respond to you, David, I will allow it to be opened back up. Pressure's on them right now. You can't tell them to listen to this.
Okay, we'll see. We'll see.
All right. So let's jump in. This again, we're going to outline the season, what we're planning on doing. As you guys know, in the past, we have had a blend of after-hour specials, which has been such a gift to have people on like Andrew Lazo, Patty Callahan, Douglas Gresham, other people that we've brought on. And then we have our usual episode, which is going through the chapter. This season, we're going to have our regular episodes every Tuesday. So there'll be one letter a week. That way, those continue at a very smooth pace. If you guys want to follow along, you will know the next letter is coming out the next week, barring something extreme that makes it hard for us to record. Now, the bonus episodes, meaning the after hours, those, there's not going to be one every Thursday. But whenever we have some sort of bonus episode, an after hour, we are going to throw that on the Thursday time slot. It'll help us keep flow and allow you guys to follow along with a very routine pace.
And we have some wonderful guests all lined up. This next season is entirely planned, and we're going to have Holly Ordway, we're going to have Dr. Michael Ward. In the same way that we had Tolkien month last season, we're going to have an Owen Barfield month, because Owen Barfield is an inkling that not a lot of people have read much of or even know about. So we're going to have an Owen Barfield month where we're going to be speaking to his grandson, who also happens to be called Owen Barfield, which led to a very confused email exchange that I will explain closer to the time. And we'll also be talking to Mark Vernon, who's done a lot of work with Owen Barfield stuff, and also scholars such as Malcolm Guite.
I'm very excited to talk with Owen Barfield again. I met him during the Westminster Abbey Memorial Stone in 2013. And then in my work on early prose joy, Walter Hooper sent me photocopies of Lewis's notebooks. And in one of the notebook pages, there's actually a poem written by Owen Barfield in his own hand that the Barfield estate didn't even know about. So I have a copy of that, and maybe we can trump that out. But perhaps the best thing that I love about Barfield is that wonderful quote where he says, "What C.S. Lewis thought about anything is secretly present in what he wrote about everything."
Wow.
100% true.
And that really defines it for me. So we owe a great debt to Barfield, who Lewis called the wisest and best of his unofficial teachers.
And we're also going to be having a poetry month. Because one of the things that a lot of people don't know about Lewis is his great desire in the early part of his life to be a poet and his various attempts at becoming a poet. So we're going to be looking at that specifically, and we're going to be speaking with Dr. Don W. King, who is the man when it comes to Lewis's poetry. And we're also going to be looking at some of Lewis's works briefly, Dimer, Spirits in Bondage, and we'll also be speaking to poet D.S. Martin, who is a poet who has written poetry about Lewis.
Is it bad that my first thought when you keep talking about poetry is from the episode of Friends when she goes, "You're a poet and you don't even know it"?
Yes, that is bad.
Yes, that's bad. Yes.
Uh-oh.
Now I'm outnumbered with my lack of sophistication deeply.
I think that, Lewis speaks eloquently about, he says in The Four Loves, now that Charles is gone, meaning Charles Williams, I actually don't have more of Ronald, meaning John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. I actually have less of him, because I'll never see that particularly Caroline look on Tolkien's face. And so three friends together expand the experience and the love exponentially. And so don't worry, Matt, we'll gang up on David soon enough. And I'm free game for the two of you.
And we should also take this time to note the Skype sessions. In the past, as you guys know, those have been supplemental, and they still are. This podcast is the central aspect to it all. But those are more David and I free-flowing conversation. They are going to be more intentionally supplemental, might be the best way to do it. We will be having some incredible guests only come on the Skype session rather than because we just don't have the capacity or the room to do it on this podcast. So that's to say, please go subscribe to that. Subscribe now, turn on the notifications. It's becoming a lot closer of importance to the podcast than it was in the past season. So I strongly encourage you guys to check that out. Andrew and I yesterday briefly were chatting for actually about an hour. And one thing I noticed is
that's a brief chat with me.
Yes, is I was like, man, Andrew has so much wisdom And we were just somehow, we ended up talking about love, and then he would go down the path of 4 loves, and we talked about Tolkien. And I said, you know what, Andrew, we're going to do some of these in the Skype sessions, because this is selfish of me to be the only person to hear this. And so some of our Skype sessions are going to be diving deeper into Andrew's brain, essentially.
Well, and I'm looking forward to that because my doctorate with Northwind Seminary is focused on romantic theology. And so they're looking at the theology of love and all of the inklings. And what I'm finding, even in my initial reading, is that the center of the inklings is not Lewis's sense of Sehnsucht or joy or longing. The center of that longing is love. And we talked a little bit fruitfully about love being the center and the end of the Lord of the Rings, and I'm finding that in Barfield and Williams as well. And so I think that what Lewis wants us to be concerned about is seeing clearly the love of God, and then how to apply that great theological concept into our own lives with how we treat each other. So I'm looking forward to that Skype session.
If that's not an advertisement for you guys to go subscribe right now, I don't know what is. You'll get more of that.
We'll pause and let you click. Go ahead.
Yes.
Not only will you get more of that, you will also get interviews with authors as their books come out. Like I said, we planned out this season, so the Skype sessions are a way of us sneaking in authors who have just released a book that doesn't necessarily fit with the theme of our season, but we want to talk to them and we want you guys to know that their book is released.
Oh, and the final thing with that real quick too was there's be a lot of these episodes will be just 2 of us on it, not all 3 of us. And so the third person will get a chance if they have the opportunity to sometimes do the Skype session.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that too. And, you know, they say in Israel, when you got married, you got a whole year off and you didn't work and you didn't serve in the military and everything. So this is our anemic way of giving David some time off from all the work that he does in his first year of marriage.
Yes.
Marie can thank us later by sending us scotch.
She has already thanked you now by allowing me to do this.
Correct answer.
Here.
In addition to the Skype sessions, one of the things we're also going to try and do is have some watch parties. Because there's a lot of videos out there. There are the Narnia movies, there are biographies about Lewis and documentaries. And so what we thought we would do is, for our patrons, we would have a watch party where we watch one of these movies, one of these biographies, one of these documentaries, and then all jump on a big Google meeting and chat about it afterwards. And our initial aim is to maybe have like one a quarter. And if you're one of our Patreon supporters, you'll be finding out about the next one that's going to be coming probably in the next couple of weeks.
I'm excited for those. Because that's just be another level of connection with our community members. The Slack channel, which our Patreon subscribers get access to, has just started to take off. I mean, it's already been taking off, but just as more people come, it's getting better and better. And that's another level beyond what we can normally do. But this will be another level of in-person, or not in-person, but more personable vocal conversation. And I love that because we all just over the similar love of Lewis. We all come together.
Well, and especially in this time where this coming together takes on an increased importance because we're not able to. My wife and I were just lamenting the fact that we can't go watch Mulan in the theater. And that experience is so limited for some of us. I heard somebody mourning over the fact that Zoom has put an end permanently to snow days because there's now no excuse not to go to school. But in this time where we're separated, I think watching the same movie all together and then coming and talking about it, I don't know, maybe we send out a Patreon packet of popcorn.
Great idea.
That is actually a fantastic idea. Yes. Okay. We're gonna see if we can make that happen.
Okay, great.
As an aside, I actually have seen both Mulan and Tenet.
Oh.
Mulan, a little disappointing. Tenet, you know, Christopher Nolan likes his complicated stories, you know, Inception, Memento. I don't know what he was on when he was laying this one out. If you didn't understand the earlier movies, you're not going to understand this one.
Okay, great. Well, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Face the Music, is fantastic. So.
Man after my own heart. I'm really excited about that one.
By the way, and this is also maybe an offline note, there is in the 4-disc DVD of the collector's edition of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, there's a movie in there called C.S. Lewis, Dreamer of Narnia. And we actually had at one of the foundation events, I think in San Diego, we had the filmmakers on to talk about that. And it's tough to get a hold of a copy. Actually, you can find it on eBay for 10 or 15 bucks. But that's a really good documentary that I just want to throw out there. And it's very well done. They've kind of animated some of the illustrations from Narnia, and they use the Seven Chronicles to talk about phases in Lewis's life. And it's about an hour,
Nice.
hour and 15 or something like that. So it's a really accessible, probably the most accessible film biography that I've seen. Lots of interviews with lots of the Lewisy folks.
I'd also now like to talk about a segment that we're going to have at the end of each episode. In this episode, what we're going to do each week is we're going to take all of the twisted advice that Screwtape has written to his nephew, and we're basically going to straighten it out. We're going to put it into some simple do's and don'ts, and possibly even add a listener challenge maybe each week. And about a month ago, I started brainstorming ideas, and I put them up on social media. Some of the titles for the segment, they were scriptural, things like Resisting the Devil from the Epistle of James, the Armor of God from Ephesians 6, and those kind of motifs, battle plans, stratagem, Michael's memo, since, as Lewis says, that the opposite of Satan isn't God, but Michael the Archangel.
That's a clever one.
I quite like that.
St. Michael's memo.
Yeah. Why did I not hear that one? I might have voted for that one.
As well as the patient prognosis. So Screwtape is always talking about the patient. Well, this is how we make him well. And then there are a few others like untwisting Screwtape, unscrewing Screwtape, straightening out Screwtape. And by far the most popular was unscrewing Screwtape. But who knows? We might vary it from time to time.
Yeah, well, I don't think that there are any rules except the ones we apply to ourselves. I think it's an important concept in Lewis, and we talked about this some when I was on last year with Till We Have Faces. A lot of times, in order to help us see things clearly, Lewis will flip things upside down. And so if you think of Narcissus as seeing himself in the water, falling in love with his beauty and dying, well, Lewis is flipping that upside down with Eustace, who sees himself in the water, falls in love with how ugly he is, and because he disaffects his own self, he lives. And so always kind of reading Lewis, seeing what he's flipping upside down so that we can figure the puzzle out and straighten it out. And I think that that's a capital way to approach this kind of devilish advice.
And I love this because I even mentioned to Andrew yesterday, but one of my favorite things with this podcast, outside of obviously diving into Lewis, is the point of it is to discover the truth and beauty of Christianity. It's not just to fall more in love with Lewis. Of course, that's going to happen, hopefully. So I love at the end of the day, okay, how does this apply to my spiritual journey? How does it apply to my Christ forming within me? How does it apply to the way I treat other people? And so this unscrewing Screwtape is going to really create opportunities for that, the application side of it, to come to light as we go through this.
Well, and certainly, I think another one of the kind of guiding principles for reading Lewis, and especially when it comes to reading Screwtape, he says, I think somewhere in the first letter, how we devils have. Oh yeah, here it is. It's in the very first paragraph. People in the past still connected thinking with doing, and were prepared to alter their way of life as the result of a chain of reasoning. And so Satan wants us not to change what we do because of what we think. But we see Lewis, even before he's a Christian, as soon as he starts believing in God, he changes what he does, and he gets up an hour earlier and starts going to church. And Lewis, I think one of the things that makes him enduring as an example is he does what he thinks. So it's not just an intellectual episode for him. He actually does something about it right away. And for me, that's one of the most powerful examples that he gives me, and that's part of why he's my master.
I love that.
Well, Andrew, why don't you tell us a little bit of the background to Screwtape? Basically, where did this book come from? Because it really helps you actually understand the book better when you understand what gave Lewis the idea.
Yeah, well, it didn't all begin with a picture. It all began with a radio broadcast. As I was doing some background research, some of the dates get all messed up, and you know how I am about dates. So Walter Hooper gets it wrong early on, but then we finally have the letter evidence about what actually happened. So the World War II breaks out in the fall of 1939. and Lewis famously is involved with this. That's when he gives his wonderful speech learning in wartime, which in some ways addresses where we are today. Warney is in service, and he gets called up and goes back to service. And so one of the things we love is when Warney is away, Jack writes him all of these wonderful long letters. And so we have, what he's thinking about and what he's reading in these letters. And so it's in one of these letters to Warney that he records that in July of 1940, he and Humphrey Havard, one of the other Inklings, were listening to the BBC, and they were broadcasting a speech in July of 1940 where Hitler is appealing to England, saying, hey, I don't want to destroy this great empire. I don't want to harm it at all. And he's making this apparently, really passionate appeal for peace when he's really planning to try and destroy the world. And so Lewis writes about it the next day. So this is on a Friday. On Saturday, Lewis writes to Warney, we were listening to Hitler's speech together. It's a positive revelation to me that while the speech lasts, it's impossible not to waver just a little. Statements which I know to be untrue all but convince me, at any rate, if only the man saying them says it unflinchingly. And so that's what happens with Hitler. And it's what we call nowadays wrong but strong. You see that in Darren Brown, in some of his videos. If you say something wrong and say it loud enough, people are going to think that you're right. We won't comment on the political election coming up.
I always say to people, you can scream it as loud as you want. It doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
Whenever they do that.
But people will hear, and people are relatively thoughtless a lot of times. And so that's on Friday. On Saturday, he writes to Warney about it. And then on Sunday, he goes to noontime church. And while he should have been thinking about the sermon, he starts thinking about, hey, I wonder what would happen if I did a series of letters from one senior devil to a junior devil, teaching him how to damn a soul, kind of having that same effect that Hitler did. And so he says, I think it might be useful and entertaining. It would be called as one devil to another and would consist of letters from an elderly retired devil to a young devil who has just started work on his first patient. And I think that word is crucial. Somebody asked me after I did the talkback for one of the Max McLean Screwtape on Stage, they said, why does he call him a patient? And I had to think about it. And I went home and I thought, okay, well, a patient is somebody who the doctor is trying to make better. The expert is trying to make us better. Well, the demons are experts at damning the soul, and they are trying to make us worse, right? And so that's kind of where it all started.
And everything in Screwtape is turned upside down. So whereas the doctor tries to make you better,
right,
the demon is going to try and make you worse.
Right.
And also, he's going to give you the treatment.
Exactly. And that's so that formed the basis of the Screwtape letters. They were published in 31 installments in a kind of a Christian periodical called The Guardian, not the newspaper we now know. But it was published between May and November of 1941, and then published as a book in 1942. And it was just extremely popular.
I heard that Lewis got paid £2 per letter from The Guardian. And as usual, he gave the money away to widows and orphans. And am I right in saying that this was the major incident that caused them to start the Agape Fund, because he then got stung with a massive tax bill?
It was. Lewis, actually, this really kind of set the course of Lewis's life in at least three distinct ways. First of all, he made a ton of money. But he thought, I'm writing for the Lord. How can I possibly hang on to this money? And so he gave it all away, not thinking that the tax bill would come. And the tax bill came, and it almost ruined him before he got a little bit more royalty money and paid off the tax bill. His best friend, Owen Barfield, who is a solicitor, a lawyer, took Lewis's finance in hand. And so for the rest of his life, Barfield set up the Agape Fund, or the Agapenary, where 2/3 of Lewis's royalty income from all of his books would go to charities. And often Lewis didn't even know the extent of his own charities. So the Agape Fund gets set up. Lewis begins getting letters from everywhere around the world. He had written The Problem of Pain, published it in 1940. And so between The Problem of Pain, a work of Christian apologetics, and this kind of popular, anti-devil book, Screwtape, Lewis began getting letters and got them for the rest of his life. And he felt like it was his obligation to answer every letter that he received. So he would often spend 2 hours a day answering letters, 50,000 of them he wrote during his life. And the third thing that really happened out of writing Screwtape was it made him incredibly popular, even put him on the cover of Time magazine. So those are the three kind of lifelong effects that this book published in 1942 really had.
And it also was something of a cauldron of ideas that started bubbling at this point, right? Because he was also writing the preface to Paradise Lost at the same time, which is all about the fall and Satan's influence.
Yep, absolutely. And not only that, he started giving the broadcasts, which became Mere Christianity, and there are whole sections on the enemy or the devil in Mere Christianity. And he was also writing at this time Paralandra, which features a demon-possessed character. And so he's giving a lot of thought to the devil. And so a lot of times what you'll see is that ideas really coalesce around a certain time period with Lewis.
Now, I did actually have one question that I've been meaning to ask you. When he was listening to Hitler, My Last Appeal to Great Britain, with Dr. Havard, Lewis could speak German, right? So was it in the original German, or was somebody translating it?
That's a great question. And I actually had it myself, and I didn't really know the answer until I started doing the research for this episode. And in his wonderful C.S. Lewis companioning guide, Walter Hooper gives the background to Screwtape. And Hooper says that during Hitler's speech from the Reichstag in Berlin at 6 p.m., the BBC gave a running translation. So it was possible to hear both the original of Hitler and an English rendering. So Lewis read German, but I don't think that he really spoke German.
All that book knowledge.
Yeah.
When I was doing some research for this, and you just briefly mentioned it a second ago, David, but and maybe, Lazo, you can expand on this, but the influence of Paradise Lost, I never knew any of that part of Lewis. And I read an essay that was talking about it, and from Paralandra to Screwtape Letters to, was it Voyage of the Dawn Treader, or was one of the Narnia books? That it was explaining the influence that it potentially probably had, because Lewis wrote so much about it. And it mentioned that Lewis really didn't like that the Romantics heroicized, if that's a word. It might be a Matt word. Heroicized.
Wow, we are hitting all of the points on a typical episode. This is wonderful.
Yes.
Love it.
Made a hero of.
Made a hero of. It's just an incredible day today, guys.
Incredible.
Or how about lionized?
Ooh, that's better.
I like that.
He's going to make us better men, Matt. Carry on.
Yes. But made a hero of some of the characteristics of the Satan character in Paradise Lost. Not that overall he was a hero, but that he would go into battle and ride, and there was like courage and valiance, and he did not like that. And so the essay was arguing that in Screwtape Letters, it was very intentional to make sure that Screwtape came across petty and vindictive and just in no way admirable. You don't read it. Like when I read Mere Christianity, and listeners know this, I was actually considering becoming an atheist. And then when I read Mere Christianity, I wasn't necessarily convinced of the existence of God yet, but there was something about it that drew me to the beauty of it. And I said, I don't really know if God exists or not, but that life seems to bring joy and happiness. Well, the opposite happens with Screwtape. You read that and you go, I don't want to be that person at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and Milton, I don't think was, his purpose was, according to himself, was to justify the ways of God to men. But this kind of heroic, noble Satan is portrayed in Paradise Lost. And then what soon happens, especially in the 20th century with the advent of modernism, G.K. Chesterton famously said about the early 20th century, the Christian ideal hasn't been tried and found wanting. It's been found difficult and left untried. And so people dismissed the idea of biblical Christianity or a real devil. Lewis even addresses it. Do you mean at this time to bring back the devil with horns? And he says, well, I'm not particular about the horns, but there's an exaltation.
And I don't know what the time's got to do with it.
Exactly, right. But there's a heroicizing, lionizing of the devil.
No!
See what you've
Stand
done?
firm, Andrew. You are our bulwark.
But yeah, there's this idea of, and I think it's best, I hope it's a title of one of the episodes. I think it's best expressed by a Rolling Stones song, right? Sympathy for the devil. And if you've rejected God, you can look at maybe the possible nobility of the devil. And of course, that's a myth and a lie. The thing that I love about devil worshipers is that they don't know that the devil hates them. He doesn't care about their worship. And so in any case, there's certainly this kind of mid-century fascination with, the ugly, the absurd, the grotesque, and exalting that. And you see that in a lot of the art, literature, art, sculpture, all the rest. And so Lewis, I think, is, as a fire-breathing, hot gospeling Christian, trying to present who the devil really is. And you're really wise to, I think, see that and point that out.
And that was something that he addressed also in The Great Divorce, in responding to Blake's The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, because that was also formed in that very similar collection of ideas that maybe the devil isn't quite as bad as we thought.
Mm-hmm. Well, and he's addressing the desire to have both extremes. And in his poem, God in his mercy made the fixed bonds of hell. God establishes the boundaries of hell so that hell can't infect paradise. What's the old saying? It doesn't take a whole lot of dirt to ruin an ice cream cone.
I haven't heard that one before.
That's good. Well, I like when I was reading that essay related to what we're talking about with Screwtape, I felt like it worded it very beautifully this way. The Screwtape letters are deeply committed to a narrative in which abandonment to the will of God is humankind's only ultimately worthwhile pursuit. And the demons are dedicated to thwarting that pursuit. Mm-hmm. They do it by trying to woo the patient through pride.
Mm-hmm. And remember that the opposite of pride is love, right? It's not humility. Love turns outward towards something else. And if I'm right about Lewis being mostly concerned with love, and as he says in Mere Christianity, Book 3, Chapter 8, pride is the great sin. Pride says me, and love says you, and ultimately says it about the whole universe. And so that's why the demons are food for each other. They're all self-serving, self-consuming. And you see that everywhere in Lewis.
But you and I are going to talk about that in a Skype session, because
Absolutely.
Andrew mentioned that yesterday, and when we were talking about Orwell versus Psyche. And I asked, what does Psyche do different than Orwell? And you said she turns without. She heals. She turns to the God, all this stuff. So I don't want to. That's a teaser, Skype session, future. It
certainly is. But also, I think that maybe the great takeaway for listeners and the application is always the two great commandments. I'm training to be an Episcopal priest, and I can see already that the focus of my ministry will be loving God and loving each other, and then grappling with what you and I talked about just briefly in a private conversation yesterday, Matt, is focusing on God's great love for us. If I could deeply understand my belovedness and then express that in my love for God and in my love for my neighbor, that would be a complete Christian life.
I'm so excited for this.
It is kind of odd, though, when you think about it, that it's this book that takes an Oxford Don and catapults him to fame and somewhat fortune, although he gives most of it away. All of the work that he did. Okay, for people that obviously can't see our video feed, since this is on the podcast, Andrew is now showing off his copy of Times Magazine with C.S. Lewis on the front.
His heresy Christianity.
I'm just gonna tell people, if you ever try and get into this game with Andrew, as like, well, let me show you my C.S. Lewis stuff, you are going to lose.
But the thing is, the subtitle of that Time Magazine cover from September of 1947, Lewis's heresy is Christianity. And it's important to know that at this point, the idea of traditional Orthodox biblical supernatural Christianity had largely passed out of the public and the public mindset as even a possibility. And so by being a Bible-believing supernaturalist and Christian, Lewis was in some ways a heretic, and it cost him greatly in the academic world.
I recall one of Warney's letters. He says that one of the reasons that Lewis possibly lost a poetry chair or award was because he wrote the Screwtape letters. Somebody, when they were going to vote, they said that they were definitely going to vote for the other guy because Lewis wrote Screwtape.
Yes, and that's exactly true. The other guy by the name is, confusingly enough, Cecil Day Lewis. So it was CDL versus CSL. And that Cecil Day-Lewis is actually the uncle of the actor Daniel Day-Lewis, who some of you may know.
Whoa.
So, but yeah, Lewis, I think, sealed his fate. And I think he knew that he did. Once he spoke up in Problem of Pain, in Mere Christianity on the broadcasts, and certainly with the Screwtape letters. He committed the cardinal sin of any Oxford academic. There were two things that he did that really offended the Academy. First of all, he published outside of his field. So his field was English literature and philosophy, but he published in theology, which is just not done.
Particularly believing theology.
Exactly. And then the other thing that he did was he published popular works. So funny.
They're so popular. I'm recording from a cabin family place up north, and all three families are here of my grandparents. And my cousins have all read it in high school. My other cousin did. My brother-in-law has read it, loves it. He runs a company, and he was talking about having some of his employees read it. Like, this is incredibly popular work of his.
But I also don't understand where this slur of something being popular comes from, because generally it means it's readable. One of the things that I love about Diana Gley's work is I've now started her more academic work. It is still beautifully readable. I understand what she's saying. That is not true for all academic work that I have tried to read.
Town and gown. So the big conflict in Oxford is between town and gown, the gown-wearing academics. And there's this sense that if you are understood by the popular people, you must not be doing intellectual enough work. And some of that is true. I mean, the average newspaper, article is written to 8-year-olds, and I think or 8th graders, and I think that's even lower on the internet. And T-Bone Burnett, the songwriter, says, "How come I think that it's something? As soon as something appears in the news, it ceases to be true." And it's not a very thoughtful world. And so, if Lewis is doing something that really strikes with the populace, between that and his BBC broadcasts, that makes him an outcast in the effete, elite, ultra uber high intelligentsia world of the British Academy, especially at Oxford. And so, yeah, there was certainly a prejudice against the common people.
And I always say, I like to take the opposite approach, because I think it's to help boost up Lewis there and say, I believe when you can explain it to the common person, that means you truly understand it. Like when the concept is incredibly tough, if you can't explain it, I'm not sure if you really understand it. It doesn't mean you're explaining it to the point where they can understand everything you're understanding. But like Mere Christianity, reading scripture, theology, it's deep. He was able to do it, though, where people can pick up Mere Christianity and understand some pretty intense concepts, especially in that last book. And that just, I think, goes to show how brilliant he was.
Well, it all goes back to Till We Have Faces, as does everything.
Let it go, Andrew.
No, let it flow. Remember what the fox said. To say the thing you mean, the whole of it, and nothing else, that truly is the art and joy of words, right? To express clearly. And that's kind of part of my universal field theory of Lewis, is that he was after clarity. He was after making things clear. I think that's part of why he names Lucy, because she's lucid and sees clearly. And then the other thing, of course, as I keep going back to, is not just clarity, but also charity. But that's not what the Academy is about. And sometimes you don't even get your thing published unless it's got enough jargon in it.
For people who are hearing this and wondering, I want him to talk more about clarity and charity. Claritas, Charitas, that's going to be a Skype session. We already identified that yesterday.
But I think all of this sums up in the fact that Lewis was a master communicator, as Stephen Beebe likes to say. And as he points out in his book, C.S. Lewis and the Craft of Communication.
Oh, it was a joy to, I got to read early drafts of that and have great conversations with Steve. And I think that he's really done yeoman's work and really blessed the Lewis community by saying what makes him such an effective communicator. And Matt, it's like you were saying, he was audience-centered. He could write very academically, like Diana does, but he also wanted to make things clear. And I think that you're right about Diana. She spent 23 years researching. Oh, David was mentioning that. Researching and writing The Company They Keep, and really crafted carefully the prose of that. In fact, I had a quote in that book. She quoted me in that book, but Diana cut it because it interrupted just a little bit the flow of the prose. And I'm glad she did. It's the most readable scholarly book I've ever read.
And I think that's a beautiful transition for me to interrupt Andrew once again and say that we're really looking forward to the rest of this season. And listeners, in the meantime, please check us out on social media. Did you know that we had a Facebook page? If not, please go and like it. I post all kinds of articles and my quotation images that I produce on there. And also, all of our merchandise is now open up for purchase. As we mentioned at the end of the episode last season, we don't make any money of this. It's just if you would like some Pints with Jack merch, if you like a t-shirt, an etched glass, and we've got all different kinds, whether they be Glencairn or pint glasses. We've got lots of stuff for you to show off to your friends. And Christmas isn't that far away. You know, what greater love could man show to his friend than laying down some hard-earned cash to buy some Pints with Jack merch?
Okay, that may be heresy, but we'll let it slide.
Well, let me redeem it by saying that you can also buy lots of wonderful things on Andrew's eBay account because, as mentioned, he accumulates all kinds of Lewis books and memorabilia and then shares it with people on eBay.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I love scouting books, and I try to put them out there for prices that are a little bit less than you could find them elsewhere, but I also have some treasures. I think I have 3 first editions of Studies of Medieval and Renaissance Literature, and I think I have 4 first editions, subsequent printings of Grief Observed, and I've got a number of things on there. And so it's just fun for me to scout it out. I've also got some really reasonably priced things there, so I want to supply books for folks who love Lewis and do what I can for that. So thanks for the mention.
And what's the name? Because I Googled once, like Andrew Lazo eBay, and I don't think it popped up. There's a specific name associated with it, right?
Yeah, it's C.S. Lewis Fan, and we'll post a link.
Well, all of these links will be on our website, pintswithjack.com. If you click on the shop link, it'll come to a page and it will link you to the other sites where you can get the t-shirts, the glasses, Andrew's eBay, and who knows, maybe there'll be something else coming fairly soon if I can get my act together.
We're recording this like 3 weeks before it's released, and that's David's way of saying, Matt, have you done those links yet?
Subtle, right? Subtle.
Oh. Guys, this is it. We're wrapping it up. I think that's the bell. So join us next time when we'll be going
Further up
and further in.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.